Tormented Souls is a unique game. It's a true survival horror experience that values reflexes and resource management and puzzles in an era which seeks to make games as sleek and frictionless as possible. Survival horror has always appealed to those who like to be put on, to simulate some of the suffering on screen with how much backtracking and ardor they have to endure to feel like they've gone through the same struggle as the characters and earned their catharsis by game's end. This take it or leave it mentality makes some sense as the game's Chilean developer Dual Effect is outside the normal US or European market culture. They're a small team doing what they want, no more than 15 people at a time, and as few as 6 during the game's development. The game actually started out its life as a mobile game, according to a developer named Maxi in his interview with Goshen Games, and it's crazy to think the team is this small since they turned out a game that's way longer than the average survival horror game, not to mention the average indie-sized game. Despite Tormented Souls having an achievement for speedrunning it in under 3 hours, the game will likely take you about 10 hours on a first run. By Maxi's own admission, Dual Effects severely underestimated just how complicated their puzzles were, and it's this kind of admirable naivete that harmonizes with the game's take-it-or-leave-it difficulty, which leads to some great moments, even in the midst of some frustration. I had to look up a lot of things, I'll admit, and I didn't die very often in combat, so your playthrough could conceivably take even longer than 10 hours if you're going to go off your own strength alone. But for every criticism, I do want to reiterate that I'm so glad that Tormented Souls exists, warts and all. So let's get into the basic story setup first and see why that is. The story is pretty good, but a little all over the place. Our story stars Caroline Walker, who's got cosplay potential written all over her. She receives a mysterious letter from the Wildberger Hospital asking why she abandoned somebody. Troubled by this message and the photo of 2 twins that's enclosed, she heads off to the hospital to check it out. And as you can imagine, horror and surviving said horror ensues. And to be honest, if that sounds vague, I wouldn't worry too much about it. I couldn't tell you why the monsters are even on the grounds other than something mad scientist experiments, I think. But who cares? They're scary and cool looking, like something out of The Suffering or The Evil Within. There are a lot of tropes going on here, and a lot of the writing seems to be cobbling together various pet ideas that the devs really wanted in there, on top of things like the time-traveling mirrors, which make for some cool puzzle solutions, but which have zero lore justification. Maxi even said that the mirrors were part of the game long before the story was written, which makes sense. That said, I liked all the cheesy tropes, like a cult who's trying to harness the power of twins to awaken some Silent Hill 3-esque dark god, and all the other genre weirdness that I won't spoil, but which is pretty exciting, pulpy stuff. Mostly I love the tone. It's unclear to me whether the dorky voice acting is intentional, or just what happens when you source inexpensive talent, but it has all the thespian conviction of your mom reading you a bedtime story.
It's been 2 weeks since I received that letter from the Wildberger Hospital. Since then, I haven't been fine.
The writing also has some very on-the-nose prose at times, and it cracks me up how a 9-year-old girl somehow has the materials and the wherewithal to create a diary while she's in prison, but also uses terms like carotid artery. But perhaps that's part of the charm. The twist at the end and the ensuing climax is pretty cool though, and the best part about all the weird stuff happening is that you don't really care whether it all makes sense, because it's all just pretty enjoyable genre fare that's just fun to see play out. What really carries the game overall is its tone as expressed by the music, sound effects, and visual detail. The survival horror genre in general is no stranger to good music, see Akira Yamaoka, but this soundtrack, co-composed by Nyx the Shield and Begonia Carrasco, has to be one of the best I've ever heard. It's got the sonorous keys of a Silent Hill track, kind of taking classically trained skills and applying them to a B horror movie. The piano tracks especially feel so timeless, antiquated, but also melodically tight like many modern pieces. It's just not the same game without the music. And graphically, it's hard not to be impressed. The backdrops are full of bespoke detail, and despite the game reveling in its fixed camera angles, they're fully rendered 3D spaces as far as I can tell, much like Signalis's were. I can't imagine getting this game confused from many others, and that's without anything other than the monsters being of a particularly creative art design. There's just a grime and a grit to everything that makes it instantly unique and recognizable. How a team this small can wrench this much goodness out of even the console ports is just a testament to Dual Effect's talents. But if Tormented Souls was only a good feeling game to be in, it would run the risk of wearing out its welcome pretty fast if it played badly. But fortunately, Tormented Souls has a strong foundation here. So let's talk level design, combat and item use, and how that all revolves around the puzzles. We'll start with Caroline and her abilities. She's no action hero, but she's no slouch either. Controlling her is pretty smooth. I hesitate to say that you use tank controls, because that implies clunkiness, but it is the classic stop and pop RE formula that we're used to. You stand and deliver a couple shots, then either use a pretty decent dodge mechanic, or you just run away a couple paces and post back up to finish them off. I love how each gun has a bit of flair to make it not just the normal Doom loadout you see in most survival horror games. Instead of a pistol, you get a nail gun, and instead of a sawn-off shotgun or what have you, you get this weird homemade potato gun looking thing that kicks like a mule and reloads by pulling it apart and putting it back together again. You'll also get a pretty ballin' electric shock baton or lance that'll help you spar against the heavy hitters late game. But probably your most important weapon overall is your crowbar. Gordon Freeman would be proud. This thing not only lets you bash the Edward Scissorhand enemies that block your path from time to time, but once you've dealt enough damage with your guns to knock enemies over, you can and should conserve ammo by finishing enemies off with a couple good crowbar hits. All of the weapons have a nice feedback to them and their own strategic considerations. I personally use the shotgun to one-hit kill the little crawling and spitting guys because they're so fast and hard to evade, and I relied on long-range nail guns for the mid-tier enemies because they require you to engage at range anyway since they hit really hard and they aren't particularly fast. Overall, the combat takes a little bit to adjust to the rhythm of, but once you do, it's generally pretty smooth to operate, with only the occasional awkward camera angle or annoying area where, even if you're aiming right at the enemy around a corner, the bullets just won't connect. Combat's not particularly hard, but it is satisfying, which is not something that most survival horror games can say. You'll always have just enough ammo unless you miss a lot, and there's no difficulty settings, so the game balance you see is what you get. And speaking of balance, there are only 3 save slots to choose from, and you have a limited amount of recording tape save items to sort of diegetically or immersively save your progress by speaking into the machine about what you've accomplished and what to do next, which is a nice touch. These are really limited in the early game, especially the second one, and all the more so when my game crashed after my first death, which really sucked. But once the game gets going past this rather obnoxious opening, you eventually wind up with more save reels than you'll need. If anything, health was rather scarce in the endgame, as I always had barely enough ammo to kill everything. And unlike most survival horror games, you'll actually want to kill everything just to get it out of the way. The game operates more on the Silent Hill mode of just picking everything up and using it as you need it. There's no inventory juggling like Resident Evil, though you'll have to finagle quite a bit with what's in your inventory, both in reloading your guns fast by combining ammo and guns, or by examining puzzle items to uncover new capabilities. Yet again, Dual Effect has achieved a really pleasant synthesis of the tropes of the big 3 survival horror franchises in Alone in the Dark, Resident Evil, and Silent Hill. One great innovation in this department is the lighter mechanic, where you have to have it lit in dark areas or Caroline will eventually die. It's never really explained why or what place darkness even has in the lore, but it's so solid as a gameplay idea that it doesn't really matter. The way it works is that with your lighter out, you can't fight enemies, so there's this sort of Doom 3 dance where sometimes you're having to just run for your life into the dark all defenseless with the light keeping you alive but not allowing any counterplay. You'll dodge enemies here and there and have to come back once you've turned on a generator or flipped a switch to make the lights come back on. And you can also light some candelabras in place so that you can actually switch to your guns as needed. It's cool stuff and makes the world feel more believable and responsive to your input and actions. Okay, so that's Caroline. She moves rather smoothly. The camera, though fixed, has a lot of convenience built into it where it'll follow her closely until she gets to the end of a camera angle so that you can see what you're butting up against more easily. The combat's a little awkward until you learn the dodge timing, but it's fun to pull off and feels good to engage with, and the weapons are pretty effective, and the hit detection is generally pretty good unless you're at an angle. And while it's great that the game feels good to be in from a controls and vibes perspective, it wouldn't mean much unless the game was actually put together in a clever way. Few things make or break a survival horror game than it being a bad Metroidvania. Dual Effect smartly pays homage to the Spencer Mansion of the original Resident Evil with their Wildberger hospital setting. Wildberger is what a mansion and a hospital would look like, repurposed one into the other, though which came first isn't quite clear. Coming out into the main hall with its classical architecture and sculptures recaptures so much of the vibe of the Spencer Mansion. And much like that location, the hospital weaves back over and through and around itself again and again like a puzzle box, gradually opening up new shortcuts and adding a sense of depth and functional connectivity as you perform business like cycling generators on and off to light up certain areas or to stop electrical currents in another part of the facility. There's even one great puzzle where you use a screw in place of a fuse. Yeah, I don't know how that works either. But regardless, you use this screw to open up a door only to find that the next door requires the same item. To the right of the second door, though, is an elevator that you can only activate from the second floor, which you're on. So you use the elevator to go down to the first floor and push a cart in between those doors to stop it from going back up. You go all the way back up to the first door, retrieve the screw, come back down the stairs to the elevator you propped open, go back up the elevator and use the screw on that second door, which is right next to it. It makes you feel smart when you figure this out, even though it's totally intuitive and makes real-world sense is that this place was logical. So that's about as good a time as any to start talking puzzles proper, as there are quite a few others that are not nearly as hospitable to the player. No pun intended. While there are a fair few puzzles that make some real-world sense, there are quite a few moon logic puzzles that recall old point-and-click adventure games. On the one hand, this is a very classic move, as the first major 3D survival horror game in 1992's Alone in the Dark very much took its inspirations from point-and-click games, and had some rather arbitrary puzzle solutions as a result. But Tormented Souls takes the spirit of this game and ratchets it up to 11.
These go to 11.
The solvable puzzles are tough, and the quote-unquote unsolvable ones are absolutely insane. One in particular felt very classic to me and was thus quite doable. It involved noticing the highlighted weapons of several angel paintings which seem to correspond to the hands of a clock you find in the same room. Pretty simple correlation there, right? Another infamous puzzle is the cash register puzzle, where you've got to figure out how many lines and dots represent a number. I almost got the solution, but I made one critical error in my own theory, so I'll give the game some spoiler-free props here. Cool puzzle, intuitive enough, just smarter than I was at the moment. Another great one requires you to think about a plate with 4 dials in mirror image, because you have to place it upside down, which is a clever twist on what would have otherwise been a very basic exercise. But a fair few other puzzles trend from yowza, that was out there, to how would I ever guess that? There are several word puzzles, like one with a monkey see, monkey do vibe to it, and also a puzzle that tells a story and makes you go through the appropriate themed doors in an area based on their composition as it relates to the story's clues. They're just about clever, but they go off the rails when the solutions don't really line up with the clue given. Then there are other puzzles that seem totally solvable, like listening to a melody on a record player and then replicating it on a piano elsewhere, except that the record player only gives you 6 notes and the piano requires 7 notes. Another has a statue with about 7 buttons on it and a totally irrelevant seeming super short clue about flowers next to it, which have no discernible connection to the buttons. It was so weird. But the real dogs of the puzzle world are the sometimes 2 to 3 hour long gaps between a puzzle or an obstacle and the item needed to solve it actually showing up. So many times I forgot that a dead end hadn't been combed through because I didn't have the item yet, and would follow the game's lead to go across the facility to advance the story, totally forgetting they even existed by the time I got the necessary piece to get past them. Now normally that wouldn't be much of a problem, but when you see so many connecting pieces hours apart with no objective updates that'll keep this in mind for later, and oftentimes make you go completely across the facility to an area you haven't had any reason to mess with for a very long time. And don't even get me started on how complicated it gets when you open up the alternate dimension, which isn't even on your maps. So you'll have to basically memorize all the characteristics. A fair few times I just sat totally bewildered as to where to go next. Now I don't want the game to hold my hand per se, but I would have liked some impetus from the game world to go, here's what you might want to do next, either as the game's character or just as someone who's looking at this building as needing to talk to itself. That's not to say I don't appreciate the ideas here, but many of them are implemented in either incomprehensible ways or just flat out have no game flow to them at all. I love the idea of setting processes up in the past in that mirror world that would take too long to do in real time and then finding them finished again in the present when we return, but the logistics of ever making these rather wild connections as to which items are to be combined and then where to put them between time periods, or just the general location in the present, are fairly out there. I've never seen so many either remarkably specific solutions or strange ones all in one place before. Sometimes it's pretty admirable.
Impish or admirable?
Other times it's a bit of a whoosh over my head and a bit of a miss me with that shit.
It's impish. Ow!
And while I'm expressing some frustrations, let's rapid fire a couple more before we bring it home and figure out whether I can truly recommend Tormented Souls. First off, why does the inventory open up to your puzzle items page instead of the one with your health and ammo and your lighter? It's much more common to want to reload from here or switch weapons or just to get out your lighter to see in the dark, especially in the first couple hours. And yet I have to bypass a page largely full of one-off puzzle items to get to what I'm meaning to comb through every 5 minutes or so. It's just wild. Couple that with a map that never comes up on the floor you're actually on and makes you click around between floors to find out which has the blinking highlighted area to tell you that you're there. I also found that quite a few of the notes I picked up didn't show up in my inventory, which is really bad when you need to reference them to solve puzzles.
Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have
Everyone's got a
phones,
phone.
right?
I sure do, but I had to take quite a few photos with my phone when the game should have just been storing these for me for future reference. I also don't get why, when you're messing with this combo key that's part of some very out there puzzles, that it blurs out the door with the symbols on it that you're trying to match the key's adjustable dials to. That's just unnecessarily unhelpful. Let me take in both the puzzle and the clues itself in tandem to get them to match. Please and thank you. And one complaint I want to make forcefully is this one that'll be huge spoilers as it's the last boss fight, so skip to here to avoid this particular section if you want to save this for your own playthrough. So we've covered how tedious the puzzles can be, but I do want to point out briefly how awful the last boss fight is, which feels like one big, goofy, shitty puzzle. So you have to shoot the boss 6 times with your nail gun, or I guess the equivalent damage with another gun, to make these little bulbs come out. Then you've got to hit them about 6 times with your crowbar, pausing every 2 attacks to dodge the spit attack. You also can't hide behind cover, as the boss's spit attack goes through otherwise solid-looking objects.
What is that?
And then, once you're finished with that, the tentacles will uncoil from around a tumbler puzzle, which you then have to get completely right timing-wise 3 times or the whole thing resets, wasting your limited ammo and time. And then, if you do this right once, you have to do it twice more around the arena. Any fuck-up may doom your run as your ammo supply is limited. And in case you think I'm just being dramatic, let's take a look at the timing on this tumbler puzzle, and you tell me if this looks like I got it exactly right, and it still failed.
What the fuck is that?
At this point, I could just confirm that this game revels a bit too much in ratcheting up the ways for the player to fail almost to a fever pitch. And if there weren't enough natural ways to get lost or screwed, let's not forget the ways the game can just flat out break down at times. The second save point in Tormented Souls feels way too far away for first-time players as it is, and requires a lot of business to do before you get to it. And after realizing just how far away it was, I died, reloaded, got 15 minutes into my next run, and then the game crashed. Another crash happened to me on this last, or the second to last, save point before the final encounter, which was super frustrating because I was already running around with no health items and dying to any hit I received, playing super carefully. And on my so far perfect run of 20 minutes, the game just unalived itself and making me restart one of the game's hardest sections already. Honestly, because of this looming disaster and the limited save items, I likely wouldn't have gotten through this one without, well, A, a walkthrough, but B, the Xbox Quick Resume feature that let me just put the game on standby whenever I needed to put it down for the night. One last thing I'll mention too is less of a critique and more like mercy for weak design, but Tormented Souls also has its own Mr. X variant, meaning there's an invincible stalker enemy that starts chasing you about 2/3 of the way through the game. But as many have already advised, you can tell the creature is in your vicinity by the music changing to its theme. Once you hear that, just go back through the door you came from, and 99 times out of 100, it'll reset the room and the creature will be gone. Now, why they added this creature in only to have an easy exploit to make them a non-issue was kind of strange, but it's okay with me because the thing is just way faster than you are, and unlike most survival horror games, Tormented Souls is not very good at making it so that you can run past enemies if you don't want to engage them, so I don't know how the player was ever supposed to get past this thing the fair way anyway. Perhaps that's why the exploit was added, or why it was allowed for. Whew. Okay, so that was a lot of bitching, wasn't it? Most of it's justified, I swear.
And yet.
I'm so glad that Tormented Souls exists. Yes, I had to look up quite a few things to know where to go, or how to solve a good many of the puzzles, some of which were legitimately just clever and I just wasn't getting the concept. So maybe it's easy to blame my rosy disposition towards this one on the presence of walkthroughs. But what I want to highlight past my turbulent relationship with the game's weird signposting and gaps in logic is just how good looking the game is, how eerie its atmosphere consistently is, how fun the combat turns out to be, and the rhythm of gameplay. It's pitched so very well, and there's this pulpy, goofy, and kind of badass story in there too. Tormented Souls just revives the feeling that games are something to get lost in, to lose track of time over, not just turn your brain off and slate your lust for entertainment for a while.
My child, you are pale. What happened to you?
Now, I wish that this game was a little bit more hospitable to the player, sure, but the fact that it's trying so hard to be more engaging, more thoughtful, and conceivably more rewarding as a result is to be commended. I don't always love Tormented Souls, but I often do, and I almost always appreciate what it's trying to do, even if it waffles the execution more times than I care for. And like most games I review this year, this one's getting a sequel too, which is pretty crazy to imagine since the first game started out its life as a small mobile game by a small studio and a small market. But as you can see, the graphics are much more detailed and the mood is mooding, so here's to hoping the folks at Dual Effect have refined their craft and hopefully really make something special here. This first game is a great start, even if it is trying perhaps a bit too hard to be the Dark Souls of modern survival horror.
My child, this place is giving you hallucinations. You must rest.
Thanks for watching. I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to a longtime friend of the channel in GV97, who made a very generous donation this past month to help with production costs. I really appreciate your friendship, your generosity, and your positive attitude over the years. And a huge shout out to those of you generous enough to support my work by becoming a patron. I'd like to thank Mark Neubauer, Deadforge, Hey Blondie, Hiaksho, M, Bibby Effin Bloxburg, and Melancholy Geek. And a very special thanks to James Wyatt, The Nth Review, and Hot Hamlet for subscribing to my Patreon's highest tier. And in case you thought he was done, Hot Hamlet also became a member of the highest tier of my YouTube membership as well. I'm just blown away, man. I really appreciate that. I guess what they say is true. That's Hamlet.
So hot right now.
If you'd like to be a part of the reason this channel gets bigger and better, feel free to head on over to patreon.com/high-functioning-medium, or you can become a YouTube channel member. Also check out my GOG and NordVPN affiliate links to support the channel through no cost to you. God bless you everyone, and I'll see you soon.